Hey, John here. Okay, before we get cutting, let me give you a little background on this project. Another woodworker contacted me on Facebook and said he was asked to build a C-130 shadow box. He asked how I would go about doing this. I thought how difficult that would be because there would not be much room for shadows. So, after a few nights of giving this some thought, the weekend had arrived. So Saturday morning I just went out into the garage and started cutting. I had not intended to make this video because it is not a true do-it-yourself because I actually used my CNC router. But in the end, everything the CNC router was used for was not included. So out of all the thoughts in my head, this is the one I came up with. You will see how at first I was not happy with the way things were progressing. So mid-project, I changed direction. Like I always say, I make this up as I go along. So enjoy this video, and when I'm through, you can either copy it or, as always, make it better. The base of this project was 3 pieces of mahogany wood, 1 by 6 by 3 feet each. I started by gluing these pieces together. If you notice, I actually glued 2 boards, wait an hour, and then proceed with adding the last board. I feel that I can get a tighter squeeze when I do it in sections than I can if I try to glue all 3 pieces at once. This nullifies any chance of the centerpiece bowing, and the slightest of bows can ruin the looks of a project. While I square off these boards, let me show you what is going through my head. I took the silhouette of a C-130, and I simply drew a frame around it, just like a shadow box. Now the interior of the box would not be wood, so what I did is I erased all of the aircraft inside the frame and left what was left of the aircraft outside of the frame. What I am left with is the perimeter of my shadow box. Now earlier, I said this was not a true DIY because I used my CNC router. But we all know that had I not owned a CNC router, I would have easily cut this out with a jigsaw, so you can do it. Yes, I said easily. And I think I spent more time setting up the CNC router for this cut than I would have if I would have just used my jigsaw. But in the end, only the 3 perimeter pieces outside of the box would be used. So you can just skip all these steps anyway. And no, I will not edit out my mistakes. So my next step was to give the box some height so we could fit a flag in it. So I cut my perimeter pieces to add to the frame. Now I already have folded up the Air Force flag going in at the top of this box, and it is more than thin enough to compress to a ½ inch, so I really don't need a very thick box. And when I say thick, I mean wide off the wall when hanging. So the pieces were cut at 1 inch each. Instead of using a tape measure, I just laid the cut pieces on the perimeter of the box and then made a mark to cut. Setting my miter saw at 45 degrees, I then cut my corners. Now nothing here is glued down. I just used clamps to hold the frame in position so each cut could be exact. All pieces would fit seamlessly. Yes, I'm not a pro. I'm a do-it-yourselfer, and visually pleasing is what I go for, no matter what the measurements say. Now I still need to cut the interior of the box, and since the frame is already clamped to the back, I grab a mechanical pencil and trace out the inside perimeter of my freshly cut frame. I take all the pieces of my frame to the table saw. Now set the blade a 1/4 inch high and set your fence a 1/4 inch away from the blade. I place all my pieces in the same orientation before I cut, so I don't have to give it any thought while the blade is spinning. Then I run them all through to create my glass groove. Ensure you are cutting your groove on the inside of your frame pieces. And yes, if you're watching, I'm eyeballing that 1/4 inch. Now we can begin gluing 3 pieces of our frame together. Out of the 4 choices, I suggest that you leave the top piece out for now. Placing glue on the ends, clamp your pieces, and then if you have a brad gun, you can throw a few brads in each corner. I am using an 18 gauge ½ inch brad here, very thin. So I have learned from past mistakes that the most important part of putting your frame together is to ensure that your pieces are square and that your glass groove is not obstructed, either by not properly aligning the line or glue obstructing the groove, or an unseen brad popping out inside the groove. So after I put a few brads in the corner, I take the frame corner and with a square, check all those possible errors by sliding the square in the glass groove. And this looks good to go. Going back to the base piece, I need to cut those lines out. Normally I would drill out the corners and use my jigsaw, but to save time, I take the base to the miter saw and cut a straight line up to each corner. Then after I have what areas I can cut, I pull out the jigsaw and just cut the rest of my lines. Remember to adjust your jigsaw blade cut angle to straight up and down when you get to the corner. This will give you perfect straight up and down corners. While I was cutting out the frame, I used the CNC router to cut out my C-130 silhouette. Yes, I could have drawn this and cut it out with an X-Acto knife, but I had already done all that earlier work with the computer. So I just put my foam board down and let the machine do its thing. This also gave me a perfect gap between the silhouette and the rest of the display board. You need at least 1/8 of an inch to wrap the two separate colors around each side. Each color takes up at least a 1/16, and with an 8-inch bit, cutting this does the job perfect. So now I just align the frame to the aircraft, and I draw out my interior square. This will allow me to cut the interior of the display board. If you're wondering what all the little pieces of black tape are, like with all my display boards, I use 2 pieces because I'm cheap. I need the tape to hold the top piece to the bottom piece. And if you bought 1/2-inch foam board, you would not need tape at all here. With the interior box lines drawn, I take it back to the workbench and I pull out my X-Acto knife and I cut away the excess. Don't forget to trim your aircraft as well and make sure everything aligns. Once complete, everything should fit nicely inside your box. Now we just need to felt the display board. So I will just use Elmer's glue under the felt and use duct tape on the backside for the wraparound. If you have seen any of my other shadow box videos, this one is no different. I will do the sky in blue and the aircraft in black. Just remember not to cut too close to the edges of the foam board. So real quick, let's run through this. Remember, if you are doing this and the back side seems very ugly or bulky, it doesn't matter. You will glue it down and no one will ever see any of your Picasso. After I finished felting the inside, I decided to cut the glass. I take my measurements and go and mark my glass. If you are a subscriber, it has been a while since you have seen me break the glass while trying to cut it. Well, I have even surprised myself lately. I now have a system that helps me get great cuts. I place a strip of tape on the glass to help give my straight edge some grip. My straight edge is usually just a long board that I clamp down. Then I dip the end of my glass cutter in the paint thinner and make one continuous cut. Then I remove the clamps and slide the glass to the edge of the table. I replace my straight edge along the cut and re-clamp down. Then I break off my piece and hopefully all goes well. While stacking the top and bottom pieces, I worried that the grain change on the sides of the box would be too noticeable. So on the fly, I decided to cut off the tail and wingtips and move them to the upper portion of the box. I just drew out my lines with a square and cut off each portion of the aircraft that stuck out from beyond the edge of the box. Yes, that was a lot of time wasted. I told you you could ignore the CNC router part of this video. Now really, could I have just left it the way it was? Totally yes, but I tend to be a perfectionist, so this was not going to sit well with me. So that's why I made the change. And besides, I'm making this for fun, and this just gives me more to cut. Now that the tail and the wingtips were cut, I am all in with the frame I've decided to use. I needed to cut the backplate rabbet, and because 2 of the sides were already joined, I had to run it through the router as the table saw could not be used here. With my backplate rabbet cut, I could now take my measurements and cut out my backplate itself. Because I used a router to cut my backplate rabbet, I did not have square corners, so to quickly remedy this, I simply took a jigsaw and rounded the corners on the backplate. Next, we need to attach the display board to the backplate. Place the backplate in the frame and then simply put down a healthy coat of wood glue. Then, put the display board in place. Place an even amount of weight on the display board to make sure you have a good contact, and then let it sit for a few hours. While the display board is drying, we can stain our frame. If you have not sanded it yet, go back and sand. Remember that the sand job will dictate what the final project looks like, so take your time with that portion. Don't forget to stain your wingtips and tail at the same time. Next, lay your frame back over your display board and take some painter's tape and mark where your wing and tail tip will be. Then, with some wood glue, clamp them in place and allow to dry. You can also add a few staples from the inside out to give your wings and tail some extra support. Okay, now we are going to build the top flag housing. Start by taking the last two pieces left from cutting the original frame and adding your rabbet and glass groove. Remember, they're just a 1/4 inch each, and the rabbet is the same. Cut it at a 1/4 inch deep. If you cut your 45-degree corners on all your pieces like I did when I was cutting my frame, your two pieces should already have 45-degree angles on each end. If not, go back and put a 45 on each side of each piece. Then lay them down together. Taking the top piece of your frame, yes, wait for the stain to be dry, lay it across the two pieces. With a speed square, make sure you're horizontal, then place a mark. On your bottom piece, make sure your glass groove is facing downward like it would be if it was attached to the bottom of the frame. Take your two pieces to the miter saw and cut your marks. Before continuing on, lay your two pieces back to back. If they are not identical, mark the longer piece and recut your mark. These two pieces need to be identical, and as you can see, even when using a speed square you can still come up short, but this is quickly remedied. Now we need to place the glass groove on the top piece of the frame. It should already have one on the underside, and you simply can't run it across the table saw or you will have a notch showing on the side of your shadow box that will not look very attractive. Yes, you can place a whole new piece and create a separate flag housing and then just join the two shadow boxes together, but that takes away from the sleekness of the perimeter and shows less woodworking skill in the end. Start by making your mark on the pieces where the glass groove on the upper portion ends. Next, lay a square in the glass groove of the upper piece and align your two pieces together. With a pencil, mark on each side of the square. Do this on each of the ends and then join your lines together. If you have a variable drill press, make sure you max out the speed so you don't place too much lateral stress on your arbor. Set your stopper to 1/8 of an inch deep. You don't need to go very deep here. And then route from line to line. You need to put a little stain on the inside of the groove, or the variation in color in the end will be noticeable. Next, we want to figure out exactly what part of the flag we want showing. I have chosen the eagle a little lower to allow one star to show above his head. This will put more of the eagle's wings in view, but this is totally up to you. Now we need to cut the glass for our flag housing. Normally, we would just place the corner of the glass in the corner of the frame and then place our tape as a straight edge and make our cut. But if you look closely, I am using a scrap piece and the edges are not straight, and there is no way I'm good enough to cut off those small slivers of glass without breaking this piece. So I will just make new lines and cut each. This is going to be the same process I used earlier when we cut the lower portion of this shadow box, so nothing new. Once your glass is cut, you can go back and stain the flag housing. I don't need to show you that step again. It's the same. Then insert your glass, place a little glue on the ends of your piece, and clamp it into place. Wait to place any staples into this until it is joined with the rest of the box. After it dries, you can flip it over and cut out your flag housing backplate. I simply lay the piece in the rabbet and then make a mark from end to end. There is no rabbet on the cross frame, but the flag will cover all of that, so this is really just to hold the flag in place, and all you really need is a straight line. Take your piece to the table saw and cut it. With the back plate piece you just cut on the table saw, grab some scrap foam board and cut the foam board with a little bit of the back plate hanging over the edge. This is the piece that will make your flag stay flush. Now you can glue your top housing to the bottom. Place some wood glue on the joints and then put in place. It is at this point you can put a brad in each end to help hold in position until the glue dries. Remember to pay attention to where your glass is. You do not want to shatter any glass at this point in the project. Take your foam piece and flip your flag upside down. If it's upside down, the eagle's head should be facing to your right. Then align your foam board and then begin to fold your flag around the foam board. Use tape to hold in position if necessary. Before I place the flag in the housing, I clean it. I place it on a black towel. This way I can see every little piece of dust that would show up. Once I'm happy, I place the flag in position and tack the back plate down. Now if you are making this for a real ensign that will be presented at a ceremony, then you will need to drill pilot holes and attach the back plate on with screws. This way the ensign can be placed in the box after the ceremony. The last thing you need to do is press your shadows into the display board, yes, anywhere including the plane, and then place your display board in the box. And that's it, you're all done. So what do you think? Not bad for making it on the fly. Yeah, my attempt at humor. As always, thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button.